What Greg Smallwood does in the New Human Target series is absolutely stunning. From a purely illustrative point of view, the first issue is just a series of very beautiful images in their own right with this kind of like 50s illustration style. And when paired with Greg Smallwood's storytelling chops, it elevates it into something very special. So in this episode, I want to highlight a couple of things that Smallwood does in the issue, and how they help build the tone and the atmosphere that's vital to making Human Target work. You're watching Strip Pile Naked, I'm Hass, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So the thing I want to discuss here essentially falls into the concept of staging and framing, and that sounds very broad, and we kind of talked about some of this stuff before, but there's a couple of things we see Smallwood and writer Tom King do numerous times throughout this issue that sets a very specific tone to this story. And the first is the way that Smallwood chooses to frame images within the panels by cropping them in a very distinct way. This might seem like a small point, but I think it is really crucial in creating the sort of nervy spy thriller tension that Human Target has. Take this page here, which shows kind of a quick flash of images as time rewinds to set up the crux of this story. And in each of these panels, the central action has been cropped. The gun here, the hand of the wrist grabbing, the faces, everything is being cut up by the harsh white lines. What I mean by this is that we don't get to see the whole thing in one go. We're kind of getting like a slither of what's happening. It creates a kind of sense of us not quite grasping the moment, right, of it being kind of evasive. And that works especially well in this sequence where we're kind of flashing back in time a day at a time, but it's just as effective in many other sequences, like this one of apparent Lex Luthor, where we don't really see his face from a distance, and then when we do see his face, he's almost kind of like falling out of the panel in the second image there. The comic frames these instances in a way to make the characters and the action kind of evade the audience, us, the readers. And when you consider that Human Target is a thriller story about uncovering a kind of poisoning plot, where no one, including the main character, could really be trusted, it's an incredibly effective visual approach to that kind of story. And this is a sequence I just want to take a little deeper look into around that concept, where Christopher Chance and Lex Luthor have a conversation. In the first tier, we can see this evasiveness in action, right, where the tall, thin panels kind of work to cut up an image. We only ever see half a face, and then the panel switch to showing more of the two characters. Smallwood still frames it from the side, so that we still only ever see one half of each character's face. As a thematic point, this is super interesting, because Chance takes Luthor's identity as his job, that's kind of what his character does. So there's this deceitfulness at play anyway in the comic, and that these framing choices also evoke and heighten that idea. Chance is both of these characters, so it's almost like we're seeing the two sides of him through Luthor himself. The next page of the sequence works in a similar way, it's just constantly cropping the images, so we struggle to get a real sort of foothold on the scene and on the characters. You know, Smallwood never allows us to see everything and keeps us at a specific distance. What we do see is important, so the drink being poured here plays into sort of the narrative and the story. But even that's cropped in a specific way, and again, you know, it's the absolute perfect feeling for this story. We get one traditional establishing image in this sequence, and everything else is kind of locked off and tight. The only exception of this being there's a shot where we see Luthor and Chance with a white background, and we don't ever get a real sense of space that they're there, the white evades that. So it's just very smart, clever thinking that never interrupts the storytelling, but adds heaps and heaps to the way that we engage with the story. This is the kind of silent storytelling that rarely gets its due, I think, as it purposefully sits in the background to sort of establish mood and tone and be evocative. But it's truly one of the most important reasons, for me, as to why Human Target's story is as effective as it is in this first issue. Pick almost any page in this first issue and take a look at what you can actually see inside the panels, and it'll be this same concept. There'll be cropped off images that won't really have any large establishing shots, and it'll just be sort of fragments of faces and action taking place. The other part of this that fascinated me was how everything is placed at eye level, again almost exclusively throughout the whole comic. We are with Chance at every stage of this, minus, it's literally sort of 2 or 3 panels you could argue in the whole issue. When he speaks to Luthor, we hold on his eyeline. After he's been poisoned and he crashes the car, flat eyeline. When he's being looked after by Dr. Midnight, he's kind of recovering, flat framing on the eye level. And why is this important? Well, we've talked before about how eye level framing puts you in the scene as a viewer, kind of like we're stood there in that moment with the characters themselves. But it also puts us on Chance's level here. We're with this guy, we're on his level, trying to figure out with him what's happened. To use the fun model of comics as juxtaposition, I like to bring up in most episodes, it also makes any change in this especially noticeable. So per my count, right, apart from, maybe 2 or 3 instances where you could argue that the angle changes in a certain way, and there's 2 instances where the angle is quite high, but I think that's more for establishing the scene and the locations of 2 characters in relation to each other. There is only one real image where the eyeline is distinctly different. and it's the spread near the end of the Justice League as Chance thinks about who might have been trying to poison Lex Luthor. They are specifically looking up, and also directly at us, the reader, and we, in turn, are specifically looking down at them. By doing that, it kind of humanizes them. It makes them less godlike, and more like we're watching them from under a microscope. You know, we become the detectives, which is exactly the reason that Smallwood also places us on the eye level of Chance in the rest of the comic. It's a very simple idea, right? Put us at eye level with Chance when we see him interacting with people on a regular human level as he's going about his regular business. But once he starts examining people, and once he starts looking into who may have done this, suddenly the eyeline changes and these characters get a lot smaller. They're shrinking as Chance places his magnifying glass on them. Wonderful. And only works because of the way that Smallwood restrains that through the rest of the issue. For me, this was a top-notch first issue, but more than that, it was Smallwood really understanding how best to tell this story. And I think that's something that we should always think about when we consider what the art is doing within a comic book. It's about how you best tell that story. If we think of film as a model, you wouldn't really shoot a kind of noir-y Hitchcock thriller in the same way that you would shoot, a big fun musical. There's a specific visual language that's associated with certain types of stories. And when we think of sort of spy thrillers, the locked off, cold, distant, cut up, cropped imagery is very specifically tied to that. And to do that, it needed someone like Greg Smallwood, who understood the story that was being told and also understood the best way to frame and tell that story to a reader. It's really an interesting case study in looking at what Smallwood has brought to this comic, and in seeing that, the choices that he's made, not just in the illustrative style, which, links back to that kind of 50s ad illustration, but also in the framing choices made in the panels. Long live Chance and Human Target, hopefully, we'll find out as the series goes on, but long live comic artists as pure storytellers too. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Strip Pile Naked, you can support the channel via the Patreon, where for your pledge and your support every month, you'll get access to literally years and years and years of exclusive writing, annotations, and reading lists. You should also grab yourself a subscription to Panel by Panel magazine, which is the Eisner-winning magazine that I edit. Otherwise, hit subscribe and the little notification bell to keep up to date with all the latest episodes, and I'll see you next time.